today's speakers. We were going to be joined by Just Style's own Leonie Barrie, PTC's Eric Symon, and Capgemini's Brion Carroll II. And this is me. I'm Heather Thorpe from Just Style, and I'll be your moderator for today. So this next slide is just a brief overview of today's agenda. You'll see that there is a panel discussion followed by a Q&A, which will be held at the end, where we'll invite you to send in your questions. You can do this obviously at any time throughout today's session, as I say, via the GoToWebinar menu. And now I'd like to introduce you to our team of presenters for today. Firstly, we have Leonie, who is an experienced business journalist with a background in fashion and textiles. Leonie has written extensively about global sourcing, production, technology, emerging markets, retail, brand and marketing strategies. In her capacity as the managing editor of Just Style, she has also gained first-hand experience of the industry in various countries, as well as attending and speaking at conferences and writing about the international apparel industry and the challenges and opportunities it faces. Following Leonie today will be Eric Symon. Eric is the general manager of PTC's retail business unit and has over 25 years of experience leading sales, marketing and consulting teams and helping companies across a broad array of industries deploy retail technology to significantly improve business performance. Eric has held various senior leadership positions with companies that deliver highly respected supply chain consulting services, market-leading software applications, and pioneered innovations in planning technology. And last but by no means least, we have Brion Carroll II. Brion has been developing product digitalization strategies in practically every industry for more than 20 years. He's also managed PLM software and consultative service groups, particularly heavy in retail, footwear, and apparel. As a consultant for some of the largest engineering and manufacturing companies in the world, as well as advising for top fashion brands in the industry, he has earned himself a promising seat with Capgemini, leading the digital transformation strategy for their expansive global customer portfolio. So, Leonie, start today's discussion with a question for you. As someone who is constantly in the field reporting on the latest developments and disruptive trends in the world of retail, could you share your thoughts around some of the market pressures brands and retailers are facing today? Perhaps you can share some insights from the research you and your team have conducted over the last few months.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's anyone listening today who isn't acutely aware of the fact that we're in a period of massive disruption. We're seeing a whole new group of retailers and brands coming into play, with new business models and new ways of working. And there's massive pressure on everyone out there to supply more products with more innovation, better quality, more transparency, and at lightning speed. In fact, I would suggest there are two words that define our industry right now and that come up time and time again in conversations. And those two words are speed and uncertainty. Now, it's not new to be talking about speed, but what is different is the pace and the pressure of change. And the Boston Consulting Group sums this up really well, pointing out that the time from the emergence of a trend to its mass dissemination has shrunk from 1 year to between 3 to 5 weeks, which is absolutely incredible when you think about it. This also ties in with the results of a survey we carried out on Just Style at the beginning of this year, where companies said the biggest challenges they face are to get faster and more agile. And what's behind these changes is the fact that today's consumers are in the driving seat. In other words, they want products when, where, and how they choose. And if clothing brands and retailers can't provide them, they'll happily spend their money elsewhere on everything from new phones to holidays. And as well as an easier shopping experience across multiple channels, consumers also expect a constant flow of new designs. They also want products that can be personalized to their own needs and their own interests. And for traditional retailers in particular, staying relevant in this rapidly changing world is a massive challenge. And while they're working out, trying what to do next, there's a new breed of younger, more agile and predominantly online retailers who are biting at their heels. Companies like ASOS and Amazon, who talk directly to their customers, respond quickly to trends, and then bring them to market fast. Now, I also want to look at the challenges facing the apparel supply chain. You can't just look at retail in isolation because everything is intrinsically linked, and good sourcing processes are also key to helping companies to get products to market more quickly. Saying that, many supply chains are still geared towards producing large volumes of product with long and inflexible lead times, whereas what they really need are supply chains that are more responsive with shorter, more flexible lead times, smaller production runs, and quicker deliveries. And unless traditional retailers and their suppliers can adjust, we're going to see more and more of them going out of business. Another challenge is that sourcing and production costs are going up, but sourcing can't continue to keep chasing the cheapest needle around the globe when what the market really needs is the right product in the right place and at the right time. And a sourcing model where the bulk of suppliers are a long way from consumers is also out of kilter. Moving on to the next slide, I've included a couple of quotes that reflect the challenges the industry is facing. The one on the left is from Just Style's annual Outlook report and is a quote from Lian Fung, one of the world's largest sourcing companies. During 2018, they said, companies will need to cope with disruptive macro trends that have now become the norm. More orders in smaller quantities and shorter lead times, rapid technology advancement, the pressures of e-commerce and fast fashion, and the need for manufacturers to upgrade their capabilities, including digitalization of their processes. While there's no magic bullet solution to all of this, there are some steps companies can take. One is closer collaboration between retailers and their key suppliers. Another is to choose to work with strategic sourcing countries. And one of the main themes to come out of the Just Style survey is that software tools are a key way to improve supply chain agility, product innovation, visibility, and speed. And retailers told us their investment is most likely to focus on product lifecycle management or PLM software, as well as tools to help digitize the design and product development processes. Predictive analytics were also mentioned. I'm going to finish with another quote from Lian Fung, which neatly sums up what we as an industry should be doing. Brands and retailers, they said, and the companies that partner with them cannot stand still. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Heather.
That's great. Thanks, Leonie. Okay, can I come to you next, Eric? We know that the retail market has been undergoing a huge digital transformation over the last couple of years. Please, can you share some insights on the latest innovations in retail technology and how companies can leverage these to make themselves more competitive and overcome the market pressures that Leonie's just mentioned?
Yes, absolutely. If you think about the market pressures that Leonie was just describing, as we talk to business leaders in retail footwear and apparel companies, at a very fundamental level, they're really trying to do a couple of things. One is, if you think about the issue we talked about with the need for, or the expectation of shorter cycles, more rapid response to consumers and personalization, they're really trying to understand first what it is that customers want. What do they want in terms of the products, the features, the price points, et cetera. And that could be at what we would call a persona level, or it could be at an individual consumer level. We see a lot of companies looking to personalize products and turn them around very quickly for individual consumers. So there's this aspect of understanding demand, what it is that our consumers, our customers want. And then secondly, how do we leverage our supply chain capabilities from sort of the product concept through the whole product creation process, through supply chain, et cetera, in order to get that product to them where, when, and how they want it, to Leonie's point. So what that means from a business standpoint is we see the move away from seasons to either collections or, individual products within an assortment needed to be able to be delivered very quickly in a seasonless kind of a business. We see the need for personalization. We see the need for increased transparency and visibility in the supply chain as well. So if that's the set of market pressures and business needs, if you will, when we talk to CIOs and IT leaders, they're trying to figure out, hey, how do we support this transformation that's happening? And in many cases, they think of it in terms of a digital strategy. So we're having a lot of conversations with IT leaders about, how to enable a digital strategy. And when we're talking to them, we're typically talking to them about digitizing elements of the process from, the concept or creation of a product idea through the design and development of that product, through the, creating it at cost, and then being able to source that product and being able to collaborate with suppliers and ultimately bring it to market, as well as what the consumer experience is around those products, either in the store or online. So if you think about that at a high level, we see a number of technologies, as the survey said, software tools are seen as critical to the agility of the supply chain in this area, and we see a number of types of software tools that are being applied that we think of as kind of hot in this market today. There's still a lot of interest and demand, even though PLM has been around in this space for a number of years. There's still a lot of interest in product lifecycle management as a core or foundational capability to be able to deliver, a digitized product concept to market process. But while it's absolutely foundational, what we're hearing also is that it's not sufficient. It's sort of, hey, we need to have that in place. We need to have our single version of the truth. We need all the product data in one place. We need everybody working off of one system instead of spreadsheets and emails, et cetera, in order to enable all of the things that we want to do. So in addition to core PLM as a foundation, what are some of the other technologies that are required? Well, we see a rapidly increasing interest and adoption over the last couple of years of 3D technologies for design. And they become increasingly important, not only for digitizing the process, but also you need 3D assets to enable a lot of other things. For instance, we're going to have augmented reality experiences with consumers, which is another point I'll hit on that we see as growing in importance over the next few years. You need 3D assets in order to enable those consumer experiences. As one example of where that's required. But again, 3D is a key technology to help just digitize the product, digital product creation process. I want to think about it that way. We're seeing the adoption of digital storyboards, which is really taking the concept of an idea board where you would have typically paper and markers and things, manual tools being used where we put that online. And you have people collaborating digitally, being able to draw things from social media, other digital assets they may have on their laptops and so forth into a collaborative environment where product designers can collaborate work internally or with suppliers around the world. Augmented reality I touched on. I'll come back to that in a minute. We see that as growing in importance. Material innovation and material visualization capabilities, another key technology that we're starting to see an interest in, where material innovation is so important to companies in this space. And the ability to understand and see what materials are out there, being able to visualize them and their properties in new and unique ways becomes very important to the product innovation process. We also see a growing adoption of analytics of various types, from machine learning or artificial intelligence to predictive or prescriptive analytics, being used everywhere from planning assortments or planning lines to understanding the ease of manufacturing of a particular product while it's still in the design process, and understanding the cost of it while it's still in the design process, more in a predictive analytics mode. And while those are some of the kind of key technologies, say within the product concept and design process, we're seeing an increasing interest in technologies being adopted in the store environment. what we would think of as a digitally connected store. And what we see here is really the ability to take tools and use them to transform the consumer experience in the store. Not only transform that consumer experience, but also leverage data that's gathered from interactions with consumers to better inform product design, so it becomes a bit of a closed loop. I think one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later is how that all sort of wraps itself up into what we're thinking of as an innovation platform, because really at the end of the day, what we see these technology leaders looking for is, how do I take all of this, put it into a platform that basically everybody can work off of a single platform, and I can enable innovation across that whole chain. So that's a lot of what we're seeing. Now, if you go to the next slide, I think quickly wrap up this part with a data point, which is, as we talk about innovation, while PLM and some other things are core, what we're seeing, and this is according to IDC and some research that they did, that over the next few years, in order to respond to these consumer expectations, retailers are really expected to leverage a lot of these new technologies, the analytics that we talked about, augmented reality, especially for what we call high consideration purchases, things that you're going to keep for a long time and cost a bit more money. And how do we leverage the Internet of Things, particularly, for instance, in the supply chain or in store environment, to drive digitization of this whole process. So, and you can see some of the things that they expect to see from the use of these technologies, improving consumer satisfaction, and internally things like improving inventory turns and employee productivity. So that's really, there's a lot I covered there. It was a very broad spectrum of technologies we see being adopted in retail footwear and apparel companies today.
Thanks, Eric. That's really helpful. Right, I'm going to move on to a question for Brion now. So, Brion, with the wealth of innovations and new technologies available to brands and retailers today, what would you say are the top 3 or 4 things companies need to consider to be successful when they are digitally transforming?
I always like to answer that question actually with another question. How well I'm going to close. How do I do this? Okay, there we go. Is my screen adequate enough for everyone to see? I'll just ask that question.
Looks perfect.
All right, thank you, I appreciate it. So I always answer that question with another question, primarily for the reason it's asking the company or the brand or the customer, how well do you know your customer? And you'd be surprised to know that a lot of executives don't even shop in their own stores, don't even have someone within their degree of separation that interacts with their brand or purchases their brand. So it's really understanding how well the company understands their customer. And you can see from some of these metrics that there are gaps. So it's really assessing that gap and then aiding in developing a deep, meaningful relationship with those customers. And how are you developing those deep, meaningful relationships with your customers? Are you taking opportunities to nurture that relationship? And then also to drive some kind of strategy to understand what is the opportunity when they're going to come into the store to purchase, right? So we had created this, Capgemini does a lot of thought leadership, and we had demonstrated a story about a mature company engaging a customer with a deep, meaningful relationship, and their name was Lola. We knew that Lola was investigating, trying out and training for a marathon. She was advertising this on her social threads. She was doing a lot of searching through Google and other search sites to investigate advantages and these things that would make the run more enjoyable. And we found that really she was investigating in, some kind of athletic shoe. So a lot of what we, and again, corralling shoe companies to engage her as many opportunities as they could to advocate for their type of shoe, the advantage, and then understanding their distribution in their stock so that in her area she could purchase, try on, go to one of the brick and mortar stores and try on the shoe and then purchase the shoe. But when we integrated that whole thing, so this kind of thing, if you cannot tell a story of your customer, you know, that's the first thing I say. So while say, where do we go first, Brian? It's like, how well do you know your customer? And once you know your customer and you understand, it's about thinking differently, right? And Eric, I love it. He talks so eloquently and so right on point with the type of digital disruption that's in the world, right? So it's about thinking about all of these digital disruptions and how do we make those an actual sustainable, innovative strategy for our company and for our customers, right? You don't want to be talking about a heavy e-commerce campaign when, you know, 90% of your business is done through bargain bin shopping in store, right? Doesn't make any sense. However, you might want to track through RFID who actually picks up garments, where they try them on, how often they're purchased, and those kind of analytics are helpful. So it's really about focusing on a problem that is relevant to the business. So again, another question, which everyone always hates that, like, Brian, we wanted to ask you one question, and you're asking us more questions than we asked you, which was just one. But at the end of the day, it's focusing on a problem that is particular to your business. And that's usually a use case, right? We all know about this, and we have many use cases within an organization that actually quantify an initiative, but it's taking that unique value proposition of a use case so that stakeholders and everybody can buy into it, and then marrying that with an innovative strategy. So once we create that marriage and how we get to that elevated state of you know, innovative sustainability, digitalization, whatever you want to call it, it's then actually, how does that use case and that innovation marry to the rest of our portfolio? So many times do I hear that you know, companies want to just focus on one project scope, but it's also about understanding how the implications and how that evolves in a complete company portfolio. So usually these, and I put 10 to 16 weeks to answer these questions, but at the end of the day, it's really up to the scale and size of the company, right? If you have 3 designers, you're not going to spend 10 weeks creating that, but it's basically quantifying that with actual business cases, innovative strategy, and delivery. And don't always go for big flagship PLM initiatives or digitization disruptions. Try and do it in a more agile sense. You know, and I'll say that everything that I just spoke about is you can't start thinking to the extent of IoT if you do not have a good data management backbone. That means visibility, insight, access control, and collaboration. You know, every time I pop up a dashboard, and these are kind of wireframes that we mark up for user experiences. So it's kind of like, tell me where, if I was to put some of this merchandiser's view of your organization, where would you have white boxes that have nothing in them, right? Oh, we don't know what our total costing. We don't know what our forecast is. We don't know our social footprint. So if you have a lot of white boxes here, that means you're lacking data visibility and data integrity. With that being said, it's also, how do you interact with your suppliers? And so if there is a vacancy here, this helps us say, well, we need data integrity. So I'll conclude with saying that the points are, you know, you ask me a question, say, Brian, where do we focus our time? What are the 3 to 4 points? I'll tell you, 1 is know your customer. 2 is understand what the problem statement is for you. Marry that with an innovative technology, but you gotta have a good backbone and data. And that's all I got.
Thanks, Brian. That's great. Okay, so I'd like to move back to Leonie, if I may. So Leonie, I'd like to go back to you with a question regarding some comments that Eric made earlier in the webcast. We heard that he said the Internet of Things, or IoT for short, is playing a crucial role in helping companies to meet the evolving and demanding needs of the retail industry by enabling them to connect functions from design right the way through to the in-store experience. Following Just Style's visit to the NRF Retail's Big Show earlier in the year, you reported on the need for retailers to adopt a platform approach or platform thinking. And I wondered if you could share some snippets of that research with us today.
So we've already heard about the huge challenges in retail, and both Eric and Brion have talked about some of the technologies helping to transform supply chain processes. So technologies to make them more efficient, collaborative, and helping things to get product to market on time. And these were also among some of the main topics under discussion at the NRF Big Show in New York earlier this year, with key themes that we picked out, including how the boundaries of the retail market are being blurred and how retailers increasingly need to think outside the box. For many of the reasons I mentioned earlier, and also that both Eric and Brion have touched on, the traditional retail model is well past its sell-by date. It's a linear, sort of one-dimensional flow from the manufacturer to the retailer and finally to the end consumer. And the flow of value is generally being pushed by the retailer. But what we're hearing more and more is how a platform approach or platform thinking is replacing this linear model with a more three-dimensional approach, where the retailer uses digital technologies to kind of connect the dots or drive the flow of value in many different directions, including to customers and suppliers. But it's not just about taking the old linear model of retailing and making it digital. Instead, retailers must be more than just retailers. They need to implement a totally different mindset about what retail actually is. They need to think differently about how they interact with their entire ecosystem, basically by building something that offers a whole range of experiences and products across a number of different channels and, crucially, delights their customers. It's about people, it's about change management, it's about structures and processes. From a technology point of view, retailers also need to move away from the traditional approach of building large and inflexible siloed systems. What's needed instead is to tackle the challenges with more flexible end-to-end platforms, with things like embedded machine learning that can adapt to changing needs. And by that, I mean both business needs and customer needs. There's also a massive amount of data that retailers could and should be capturing. You've got historical sales data, you've got trend data, competitive data, CRM data, social media feeds. It goes on, but it's all stored in multiple formats, multiple systems, and at multiple locations. Retailers really need to understand this data and what to do with it. After all, if you can't see and understand what's going on, then how can you change and how can you improve it? PLM is great, but if you then take a platform approach and layer it with things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, then you can move from being proactive to reactive. You can predict consumer outcomes, you can make the right decisions on what to bring to market, and you can move to things like dynamic pricing. A platform approach also means you can not only transform the supply chain, but also at the store level too. In one recent survey, half of the retailers who responded said that using technology to improve their customers' experiences would be a key focus this year. But there's also a word of warning, and this comes from the president of Global Brands for Levi Strauss, who also spoke at the NRF event. And he told delegates that the customer experience, whether it's online or offline, should never feel complicated, and that your business model needs to be simple in the front and sophisticated in the back. At the end of the day, consumers want to feel excited and inspired by your brand, and they want to engage with you. But only by breaking down the barriers and connecting all the data and systems in your business will you be able to achieve this. And with that, I'm going to go back to you again, Heather.
Thanks, Leonie. That's great. Thank you. Right, I'd like to move to Eric again now, if you don't mind. So, Eric, you mentioned that the IoT is creating significant value for companies. How can PLM technology take advantage of IoT in product development and supply chain operations? And where does PLM fit within a broader platform of solutions?
Yeah, thank you, Heather. I think Leonie had a great, introduction talking about platform thinking and thinking about things differently. There's if you think about what's out in the press these days about the Internet of Things, there's a lot of attention being paid to things like smart cities and using IoT in the factory to do things like connect to machines and be able to see what's going on, monitor their health, and do predictive maintenance and so forth. You see commercials on TV even about that. Probably a bit less attention paid to IoT in the retail footwear and apparel setting. But McKinsey did a study not that long ago that talked about the different settings or industries, if you will, where IoT was expected to create the most economic value, and retail was number 2, in fact, behind the factory setting in terms of the expected value from IoT. So you think about it in this context, what is IoT, right? It's the ability to essentially connect to things. Everybody thinks about IoT connecting to things. In reality, and Leonie mentioned this, it's about, the way we think about it, it's about connecting to things and combining the data that you're getting from things with data that you're getting from systems to deliver value and enable new ways of working. Now, in addition to connecting to the things and connecting to the systems, what is it that you need to create valuable, new and valuable ways of working? Well, you have all that data, to Leonie's point. You need some way to analyze it. So you need a good set of analytics tools to be able to take that data and make some sense out of it and get some insights out of it. Ideally, you'd want to have a set of analytics tools that help you to make better decisions and actually prescribe, in many cases, what those decisions are. And the way we think about it, the final thing you need beyond all that is a way to change the way that people visualize data, because you've got these large volumes of data, and you can't always sift through dashboards and reports, although they're valuable. We see a lot of value in being able to take a technology like augmented reality and be able to lay insights and data over physical objects when you're looking at them, or creating physical objects in a space that very, very quickly will give you insights into things that you'd never be able to get by looking at a report or a dashboard. So as we think about IoT in this space, and I mentioned innovation platform earlier in the call, this is kind of the model for how we think about it. We talked about PLM being kind of a core or foundational element. That's got all of your product information, all the data that you need about products. Ideally, that's where you're holding your 3D models and assets and other digital assets as well. And of course, there are other systems besides PLM out there, but to simplify the diagram, we just have PLM on the bottom. Then we have this connectivity layer that we just talked about. That's really what IoT is about, connecting to things and to systems, bringing all that data together to help you to make better decisions and innovate new high-value ways of working. You have an analytics layer on top of that that helps you to make sense out of all of that data. And then again, over on the left here, we see augmented reality being able to be applied across that whole spectrum. So, an example of how this platform builds at the PLM level, you might have the ability to, you've got all your product development data and so forth in there. At that level, you've also got other systems, like Leonie mentioned, point of sale systems and other systems of record in the store, for instance, that you could leverage. If you take all that data together and connect it, one thing you might be able to do is view a dashboard of product performance that combines data that you've never been able to collect together before, because you were never able to connect directly to products. And then you take that a level up, and in addition to viewing product performance, you can view or predict rather which product features are going to drive higher sales and cost less to make in the manufacturing setting. Now, that's really, really valuable. That's a level beyond just insight. That's being able to make better decisions and having the machine effectively recommend or prescribe those decisions for you. And then if you look at the applications for augmented reality, we see a lot of them. There are certainly lots of examples of AR apps, and you can find videos of a lot of these on YouTube where augmented reality is used in the retail setting with consumers to help them with evaluating, again, high consideration purchases or just seeing a product in context. What is that suit going to look like on me? Or what is that couch going to look like in my living room? Great applications for augmented reality. But if you take augmented reality into the supply chain and into the whole product design and development process, we see a lot of other apps as well. Wouldn't it be cool to have AR application that helps you do a line review, so that you're not just looking at flat images or even 3D images, but you're looking at images that you could rotate and interact with while you're in a line review process. Wouldn't it be cool to be able to, have an app that you could, hover over a material and see all the data and information about that material, from its cost to its performance characteristics to its sustainability characteristics. These are just some examples of how we view AR applications being able to provide value within the product design and development process. One of the things that we've done, and we exhibited this at NRF, and there was just a ton of interest, and I'll go back to the connected store concept, where if you think about platform thinking and you put a platform in a store environment, and think about all the things that you can connect to. We were able to connect to point of sale machines. We were able to connect to RFID tags on products, to data that was being collected by cameras in the store about consumer movement. We were able to connect to data driven by beacons in the stores to do things like know when product was being taken in the dressing room and when it was put back on the shelf. Heat maps of consumer movement around the store. We actually put a platform in a store to collect all of that data, and the insights and the decisions that the folks who are running that store were able to make were kind of unprecedented, because they're seeing data in a way and being able to collect and combine data in a way that they've never been able to do before. So it's got positive and compelling implications for monitoring and health of the assets in the store, just like we hear about it in the factory, as well as making better decisions around things like assortment planning to drive more sales in the store, understanding product characteristics of the products that are moving and those that aren't, so that you can better inform product design, and being able to even have an augmented reality app to view store performance and health by scanning around the store. So some really cool kind of cutting edge things that we're seeing with regard to IoT and all of these elements of IoT going forward. And I'll just wrap on the next slide, by looking at an example of an application for this type of technology within the product design and development process. This is a dashboard that one of our customers had created to track material development effectiveness, so that they could reduce cost in their product design and development process. And I won't get into a ton of detail here, but essentially they had an approved set of materials that needed to be used. There was not a good way to track compliance and the effective use of those materials in the product development process. And we were able to connect to different systems and things in order to create this dashboard that was giving them new insights into material development effectiveness. So, and ultimately that had an impact on lowering costs. One very simple example, but we think the power is, we're like we're still early days on a lot of this stuff. We think the power is immense to deliver a lot of value in the supply chain. So with that, Heather, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Eric. Okay, so my final question is for Brion. So as someone that has spent the last 20 years in PLM, and in your experience of working on the front line, please can you share some insights and examples into the benefits that companies are able to achieve through the use of new innovations in PLM?
Sure, Heather. Yeah. So it's kind of funny that it's been 20 years. First off, but what's really hilarious that you look at the first kind of metric here, percentage in streamlining product improvement margins. So when I first came in, one of our first engagements with an apparel company, they had all these fabrics lined out on this enormous table. In these WIP reports that were printed out on these huge paper, I think they were like the size of the Brooklyn Bridge, to track some costing variables and deliveries. And in 20 years, I'm going to say that not much has changed. I walk into some, it's because brands are constantly evolving. There's thousands and thousands of designers and innovators. So when it comes to improving just digitalization of products, that's going to be a constant pain point, right? Because there's going to be new brands, new footwear companies that get new retailers, and that have to manage a large assortment of products. So there's always going to be a desire, and that percentage is always going to be relatively high because the constant introduction of new brands to market. So I still even today walk in to, some of the largest apparel designers in the world, and some of their, apparel teams are still doing that very large table, very large boardroom, feel touch with their dips. They really have no way to integrate RFQs with their suppliers. So even digitalization is still going to always be an opportunity for PLM to showcase its competency. When we look at some of the innovative technologies, and we're working with a very large beverage company right now that is extremely innovative, extremely. And I mean, we all consume their beverages, and we know them very heavily. And I like how both are speaking about platform enablement. And what I call PLM is not just one system, right? You don't just walk in and say, "What's your system of choice?" It doesn't make any sense, because normally it's really an ecosystem. It's a system of systems. So that application tier, that data lake, whatever you want to call it, that is that catalyst for innovation. So this food and beverage company really is creating that data lake that really engages both its R&D, its bottlers, and creates a valued proposition for the customer, and really creates an innovative e-commerce, omni-channel, and even to the farther extent, a user experience that really engages the brand. So, but that only happens through understanding, these data points, right? If you have, ways to take, fountain dispensary analytics and feed those back into the R&D, that only happens through these touch points. And as many touch points that IoT, Eric said, these things, right? Whatever can consume data and feed it upstream or put it in a dashboard so executives or divisional managers can make a decision is the best thing. And I always use this as a funny point. Two hunters, for brands, two hunters walk into the woods, and one hunter just grabs his gun and he fires it off into the woods, and he looks at his friend and says, "Boy, man, I hope something good runs into that." In many brands you find that that are doing that, but at the end of the day, I think IoT type technologies are these catalysts for fact-based decision making for companies rather than ad hoc decision making. And I'll say at the end, conclude with this, that augmented reality, everybody loves it. I talk to my kids about it, and they always think about their dang video games. And that's really the appeal for most consumers, right? Is how do I virtually, based on an avatar, understand a fit before it's delivered, journey to the door, if you will, or how is the mirror in store tracking and understanding my type of purchasing and my type of real purchasing power, and those are all great. Those are some things that I think as an industry are still lagging in, but at the end of the day, there is a wealth of portfolios out there that we have yet to embark on as Capgemini to understand these massive gains through augmented reality. But it is definitely evolving to where Eric said, that these handlers, these metrics, these analytics are going to become qualitative to someone as soon as they can see them. So, but as a whole, again, I'll say that PLM is not a system; it's a system of systems, and it's really creating that value proposition to each one of these corresponding buckets. And that's all I got. And back to you, Heather.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thanks a lot. Okay, we're going to take about 10 minutes just to answer a couple of questions that we can from the audience, and I can see we've had some in already. So I'm going to come back to Leonie, keeping the same order. So come back to Leonie, please, with this question. I've got Just R maintains a PLM buyer's guide as part of their PLM coverage. Could you share some insights around what retailers should look for when selecting a technology partner?
Sure. And you know, it's actually very timely as we've recently relaunched the PLM Buyer's Guide, and it includes advice on what PLM is, why use it, and tips to help find the best vendor for your needs. I guess the answer to this question echoes comments that Brion made from earlier, and I guess the first piece of advice is to look closely at the problems you're trying to manage and what business problems you're trying to solve. After all, I think your needs will be very different depending on whether you're a manufacturer, a retailer, whether you're small, medium, or large in size. I mean, obviously PLM systems range from the very basic to the other end of the spectrum, where you would have something that's much more sophisticated, that runs from end to end, will have cloud capabilities, mobile applications, and will communicate with your existing IT systems, as well as the ability to incorporate things that we've touched on today, such as the Internet of Things, augmented reality, and so on. And even if you don't want these capabilities now, even if you don't need these capabilities now, can they be added in the future? Also, coming back to our discussions today, another question is around connectivity. Can you join the PLM with in-store consumer preferences? Can you run big data analytics about what consumers are demanding and then feed that back to the store, feed that back to logistics and back to production? And how about connecting to your website and social media? Like I said earlier, it's all about breaking down the barriers and connecting all the data and all the systems in your business. And I think that is what you have to look at when you're selecting a technology partner. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Leonie. That's brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to move on to a question for Eric, I think now, if that's okay. You mentioned earlier that there are new innovations around idea concept management. Can you shed some more light that those processes still tend to be manual and time consuming?
Yes, absolutely. So we see an awful lot going on the front end of PLM around ideation, concept development, and product design. I think the first thing is the designer electronic whiteboard type thing that we talked about earlier in the call, where what we're seeing is that replacing a manual process of people physically in a room, you know, posting pictures and ideas and things, to doing that electronically, basically having an electronic whiteboard where designers, even suppliers can be part of that process. Anybody that's a stakeholder in that process can collaborate online at the same time in this whiteboard environment and pull digital imagery, videos, color palettes, and things of that nature from social media, the internet, internal networks and laptops and so forth. So that's clearly a big one we see helping with the efficiency of that process, as well as the creativity. But in addition, on the front end, we see a lot of increased capabilities in Adobe Illustrator, where PLM systems are plugging into that, providing new capabilities to do things like quickly being able to create multiple colorways of a particular product. It's more in the design process. We see it becoming kind of table stakes for the integration of 3D design tools into the front end of the PLM process. So as we see that interest in 3D, as we talked about, increasing the integration of that is critical. And then probably the final one is the integration of voice of the customer into the design and development process on the front end, where ideation design is happening in an electronic way, where you're seeing online consumer games and tests and product feedback gathered up front. It cuts a boatload of time out of consumer testing processes and so forth on the front end. So we see a lot of stuff happening to make that process more efficient and really digital as opposed to manual. So hope that helps. Heather, back to you.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. I'm trying to read through all the questions at the moment and they're tiny on my screen, so I apologize. I've got a question here for Brion. Let me just go back. Bear with me. Okay.
Oh, I'm excited.
You're excited. It's very long, so I apologize.
I get it. Go on the next one. Move the next one. Just kidding.
Okay. From the practical vantage point of working directly with your own customers, aside from willingness to adopt change, what do you see as the largest obstacles of large apparel retailers to adjust the new landscapes, in brackets, and the necessity of adopting technology in order to survive?
Well, it's a very good question. First off, that's a very good question. And, especially when you look at global retailers, in grocers, it's really, so you also got to map that based on geography, right? So it's when you look at these campaigns and how do you get kind of this stakeholder corralling, that is usually the biggest challenge, right? So when we look at any kind of global deployment or global improvement strategy, whether it be through technology, people or process or data, whatever the introduction is to the brand or retailer, corralling all of those stakeholders and getting a prioritized list is usually the most difficult because all the GOs have their own, suggestions on the improvement strategy. So it's really about aligning that, and Capgemini does that really well. I mean, doing this for 50 years and working with brands, but particularly in PLM as it exists today, we have a very engaging model, in a framework, right? So the good thing about service companies that have been doing this habitually and constantly do it is to have that framework to get the stakeholders on board and then map that with, expectations. Everyone always wants to say, hey, I got to go to this, big flagship campaign that really needs to make an impact. And then they really omit that it's through small gains, agile deployments based on, again, I'll say geography. That's the easiest way to create that, stakeholder and kind of buy-in. So that's kind of the biggest challenge, and the adoption strategy, is not typical to retailers to do these piecemeal type of agile deployments, but it's also mirroring that with quantitative and qualitative returns that are worth the retailer even investing in it. So those are, I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you. I've got a little bit more for you as well, actually, if you don't mind. Okay. I've worked for large retailers whose main problem is getting out of their own way and an inability to identify the root problem they want to solve. Is there a correlation between age of brand and successful adoption, in brackets, and use of technology? What are the characteristics of the brands, companies who are successfully leveraging their use of technology to facilitate product innovation, speed to market, and intelligent decision making?
Yeah, again, a very good question. That I'll say that the age of the brand. I wouldn't say it's a major impact, but it definitely has. It can be a potential roadblock in introducing these type of discussions, right? And in getting them to listen, right? And that's the key, is the willingness to listen. So if ego or pride plays into that, but it's really, you have to gear the message towards the brand. If the brand's stability is, baselineable, it's operable, then it's really about the messaging. So you have to, as Eric said, and Eric went through again, and Leonie went through a wealth of type of disruptive campaigns that you can introduce to a mature brand, because when you look at these lagging brands that are just coming on board, they're eager to adopt. And then, so hopefully it's all in your messaging, right? And I think that's really, you got to know who you're talking to. And I always engage, I don't care what the size of the company is. Every time they ask me a question, the funny thing is I have a wealth of questions to ask them. And what was the second part of that question? How have they been successful at adopting it, in a sense, in essence?
Bear with me. Hang on, I've just got to click back up to it. I think it's really about what are the characteristics of the brands and companies who are successfully leveraging their use of technology.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Simple. So again, I'll say it is literally them understanding and having good data operability, right? So I don't care what technology we're taught with, RFID, IoT, analytics, if they do not have a data backbone, then you got to do first things first, right? So the only companies that are doing this successfully have a data backbone that is sustainable. So, that's the short answer, right? And usually that's the easiest, right? If you don't have a good data visibility or governance or control, then, how can we talk innovative strategies when you have so many gaps in your enterprise? So that's a simple answer.
Thanks, Brion. I know we put you on the spot there with some longish questions, so apologies for that.
I'm sweating.
That's great. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We have unfortunately come to the end of our presentation. We've sort of run out of time. As I indicated earlier, we are currently making a recording of this event, so it will be available for you to listen again, watch again, share with your colleagues. So I'll be emailing you a link to that via GoToWebinar in the coming week or so. In the meantime, there are a couple of handouts that you'll receive at the end of this presentation as well. But also, as a special thank you for joining today, PTC would like to offer you all a $100 discount towards your admission to the LiveWorks 18. Don't miss this opportunity to attend the world's most respected digital transformation conference for the enterprise. This year's conference showcases more than 200 breakout sessions, including a dedicated retail track, never before seen product demonstrations, and access to PTC management. So you can visit www.liveworks, which is liveworx.com, to learn more, and they'll hopefully see you in June. In addition to this, we'd like to invite you to check out some of the latest research on what PLM innovations retailers are looking for, as well as how this technology can help you by accessing the following content. But thank you again for joining us. We've really enjoyed having you today, and also for the questions that you've sent us. Thanks to all our panelists too for all your hard work. That's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
No problem, and hopefully look forward to hearing from you soon.